My name is Mike Spragg, and I became involved in London's Burning the pilot in 1986. I'd finished film school in 1984, and in those days, most people worked for the television companies. They were on PAYE. So to be a freelance was quite unusual in those days. I had an agent or an agency, and in that first year, I got to work on a series called Cat's Eyes, which was like an English version of Charlie's Angels. Uh, and then after a few months of doing that, I went in to do some daily work for London Weekend Television. Met Jeff Harrison, who was one of their directors of photography. We got on very well, and then shortly after that, the pilot of London's Burning, written by Jack Rosenthal, was put into production, and I was asked by Jeff to join his camera team as what's called a clapper loader, which is basically the bottom of the camera team. So my function or my job on London's Burning was as what's called a clapper loader, part of the camera team. So it would start off, the top of the camera team would be what was called the director of photography. Then there would be the camera operator, which was Ken Lowe. Then there would be the focus puller in charge of keeping everything in focus, basically. He would be the number one assistant. That would be Mike Lipman, I believe. And then I joined as the loader. So my responsibility, a little bit as the job title says, clapper loader, I was responsible for doing the clapperboard and keeping the notes of all the takes and the slates and everything. And I don't know if you know or your people know that basically the purpose of the clapperboard is that written on the front is all the information of the day, the scene number, and so on. But the purpose of the clap was basically to synchronize the sound, which was recorded independently, to the picture. I was therefore then responsible for keeping notes of every take that we did. And I was then also responsible for loading the film into the magazines of the camera, then unloading when it was exposed, very carefully, then always in a black bag, because if you exposed it to light, the whole thing would be ruined. So there was quite some responsibility there. The film would then be recanned and sent off to laboratory for processing, and it would be 24 hours, usually overnight, when my other responsibility was to go, often in those days, to a red telephone box if we were on location, phone the laboratory and make sure that everything was okay, and if there were any problems, take note of those and then go report to the director of photography, Jeff Harrison. So London's Burning, the pilot, was probably only the second big drama that I'd done, and the first for London Weekend. Um, Jack Rosenthal, the writer, was very well known, very respected, and usually was involved in single dramas rather than series. So the pilot was initially conceived as a standalone film, to be broadcast on London Weekend Television. But due to, I think, its popularity, London Weekend decided that it was worth turning into a series. Now, to my memory, Jack Rosenthal obviously wrote the script of the pilot, and I believe he was involved in writing some of the first series. But after that, it became, a more conventional television series where there'd be multiple writers. So my memory of Jack Rosenthal, I mean, I was very young and inexperienced. My memory of Jack Rosenthal, which is interesting now, almost 40 years later, was that if there ever was a script change, Jack would come down on set and work with Les Blair, the director, to amend the script or change it because maybe the scene was too long or there was some issue about it, which is a very rare thing. In this day and age, if there are changes, usually there's a quick discussion on set with producers, directors, but very rarely is the writer involved to actually rewrite. So that was a unique experience for me, that Jack was so hands-on that he didn't really want it to be out of his control. Paul Knight, the producer, was very much responsible for the overview of everything, but the creative side and the writing was really Jack's world. And then obviously Les Blair as director was very involved with Jack to progress the stories basically. Um, I didn't have a lot to do with Paul Knight, because me as the bottom of the camera department, he had a lot of other responsibilities. Of course, he had all the actors, the cast uh, to deal with, and all the logistics. Jack, as I said, was responsible for the writing, and Les was then responsible for implementing everything and getting it on screen. Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, as the clapper loader, I'm on set all of the time with the rest of the camera crew. And one of the other responsibilities for the clapper loader was to put down marks, which is pieces of tape basically on the floor, so that the actor, when they came in, knew where they were supposed to stand. So the focus puller knew what was in focus, and the camera operator had everything properly framed. So, so yes, I was very much involved in dealing with the actors every day. Uh, and of course we all became friends. And they were a very, very nice cast. I think many of them were quite new and young, and so they hadn't, let's say, learned how to be difficult like some actors can be in later years. So it was a very nice environment to work in, and everybody was very, very positive. And I think everybody knew that, especially as it was a Jack Rosenthal script, it was going to be something a bit special. And of course, in that first episode, I believe, when that first pilot, it was the story, wasn't it, of the first black firefighter and the first female firefighter, which in those days, in the mid 80s, was still very unusual. So the notion of having women in the fire service frontline and people of ethnic minorities in the front line was something quite new, and something not controversial, but it was a political thing. And so Jack's script was very topical, uh, and very of its time. Yes, working on the pilot, nobody had ever really made anything like that. Um, the camera crew itself was very young. The special effects people were also very new, and it was before the days of computer generated assistance. So basically, the fire was for real. So we were all learning how to deal with it. Now, all of the cast had gone for 3 weeks, I believe, of fire training with London Fire Brigade. So they were quite capable. I mean, they're not, fully fledged firefighters, but they were quite capable in dealing with the machinery and putting the fires out. And my memory of one of those situations was, we were filming somewhere in southeast London, and it was like a wooden garage at the bottom of this house garden. And so it was set on light by the special effects people, which was usually gas, so that you could switch the gas off, and then you'd have a little bit of a burn, and that would be put out. But because we hadn't really done this before, on that occasion, I seem to remember that the fire got out of control. And so Les Blair, the director, basically screamed at the actors, "Go and put it out, go and put it out." So they literally ran in, and the style of shooting everything handheld came about from that moment of panic where Les just said, Ken, get your bloody camera and film it. And so that whole notion of how the show started and the style of it very much came out almost probably by accident of something getting a little bit out of control. And of course, the real fire brigade were always there with us, usually off-duty fire officers, in support. So if anything had got horribly out of control, they obviously would have taken over. But the kind of style of it came out of that moment of, let's say, slight misfortune. And then the other thing that nobody had really done before was to film regularly in those real fire situations. Now, the first thing that happens when you get into a situation of a fire with heat and then introduce water is that everything will condense. And so the camera lens just literally goes milky and you can't see anything because of the condensation that's on the lens. So in that first pilot, we developed a system. There was already a spinning glass that you could put on the front of the lens so that if any rain or water hit the lens, it would get thrown off and you would never see it. But the condensation problem was something that no one had ever really dealt with before. So what we developed was Ken, the main operator, would wear full breathing apparatus so that when he was in a fire situation, he was breathing controlled air. And we put a splitter from the feed of his tank so that half of the air went to Ken and half was blown onto the front of the lens, which kept a constant temperature and then basically meant that you didn't get the condensation and we were able to film. Now, as I said, nobody had really done that before. And shortly afterwards, Ron Howard, the American director, came over to talk to Paul Knight because he was going to make this film called Backdraft with Kurt Russell. And he basically came to pick the brains of everybody that was working on London's Burning because nobody in America had really done this either. I think Paul imagined that he was going to be whisked off to Hollywood. Ron Howard went back to Hollywood with all the information. I don't think ever called him again. But obviously the show was hugely successful. I think it went to 16 series. And it was a Sunday night, 9 o'clock show. And in those days, you probably know better than I do, would get somewhere between 15, 16, 17 million people sitting down at 9 o'clock. And it was a kind of family institution and probably one of the most successful dramas of its period. So when I rejoined the show in early 2000s as then director of photography, I'd been away from the show for more than 10 years. And the reason I left in the very early days was I was keen to progress up the ladder of the camera department and become a director of photography. And Jeff Harrison, the director of photography, as I say, was under 30. Ken Lowe, the camera operator, was probably mid-20s. Mike Littman, about the same. So we were all very young. So it was a question really of I had to move out to move up, if you see what I mean, because Jeff, Ken, and did it for years. Now, when it got around to about series 11 or 12, there were some new producers that came in. Now, it was David, and I can't remember David's surname, not Newcomb, he was the later one, who came in for one series as the producer. I had known David in a previous drama when he was a location manager, so we knew each other. And there was another director of photography, oh goodness me, Alan Wright. Now, Alan and I had worked together on documentaries. He had been brought in to be one of the directors of photography on this series 12. But you always had two, because whilst one was filming, the other was getting ready for the next episode. So you would alternate each episode. So Alan asked me to come in, and because I knew David, there was already a relationship there. And I had just done a dramatized documentary for the BBC about the tragedy of the Piper Alpha oil rig, where we, in the documentary, they used all the real footage from the outside of the rig on fire, but we created the fire inside. And so it was obvious to the new producers that I had experience of fire. So David, because I knew, and also quite a few of the remaining crew members had been there right from the beginning. People like Ray Holt, the prop master. And I think there was a slight feeling, I think, by some of the older crew members. It's like, who are you people thinking you're going to come in here after we've done 10 or 12 series of this and make it any different or any better? And I think because I'd been involved in the pilot, there was less concern about me. I came in and did it with Alan. I think at the end of the first season, Alan decided he wanted to go back to documentaries and drama wasn't for him. And so I stayed on then for another couple of series. And I think at some stage, Ken would do some DP. So, yeah, that's kind of how I got back involved in it. And it was my first then really big series as a director of photography, which then helped me then move on to do other things. So the director of photography's role is really to create the imagery and the pictures that goes with the writer and the director's vision. Now, often, you will have a director that may not really be great with understanding how to construct a series of shots for a scene. They may be fantastic with the script, they may be fantastic with the actors, but there's often a reliance on the director of photography to actually interpret the words on the page and the vision of the director. And you will often find in even in the big Hollywood movies, lots of directors will always hire the same director of photography because they have a history and there is a shorthand. So it's very much the director of photography's role to interpret the words and make it as visually exciting as possible. Now, because I'd worked on the original pilot some years before, I had an understanding of the show. In those intervening years, I had done a lot of documentaries and a lot of handheld work, and I also liked to operate the camera. So when I joined then on season 12 as a director of photography, uh, I wanted Ken Lowe to be my operator because he was so experienced at it and the best in the business. And I would often do the second camera. So between us, we would shoot most scenes with two or three cameras uh, in discussion with what the director wanted. And obviously, sometimes if the producers felt that you weren't quite getting what they wanted, you would have that conversation as well. So it's very much interpreting what the idea of the film or the script is and making it practical, basically. So, working with the cast members when I came back as a director of photography, some were still there from the original film. Glenn Murphy was certainly there. Now, remind me, who was the actor that played Sick Note? Now, Richard was still there, and I think there might have been one or two others, but most of the rest of the cast after 10 or 12 years um, had moved on or been killed off, as was the way of. I think in some Blue Watch was often known as Death Watch because of the number of firefighters that died in the history of. I mean, in real life, very few do. But in our show, obviously, it was part of the dramatic sort of side of the story, because obviously, although it was an action drama, uh, it was very much a high level soap opera where the audience really had favorites and associated the storylines with all of the main cast, members. So you always had people like Sick Note, who was always trying to get out of, doing whatever job, hence he was called Sick Note. Vaseline wasn't there when I came, but in the beginning, the slippery character, there was always a reason for the nickname. Now, obviously, then as director of photography, when I came back, I had a much closer relationship with the actors. And to their credit, I think some of them felt that the show had got a bit tired, especially after 12 seasons of it. And so they were very keen that somebody new like myself would come in and hopefully breathe some new life into it, which is what I tried to do. And I think we were quite successful at that. It was still watched by millions and millions of people, but we kept the flag flying, let's say. And I tried to push push always, the quality of what we were getting in the fires. And also that year that I joined as director of photography, we had a new fire liaison officer, Roger Kendall. Now, Roger was very well known in the London Fire Brigade as an active firefighter. He was, I understand, the first engine to go into the King's Cross fire. His officer went down and never came out, so Roger ran the floor. He was the first team into the Marchioness disaster, and he was the first team into the Soho bombings. So in the history of the Central London Fire Brigade, Roger was a legend, let's say. And Roger wanted to do something different as well. So he and I worked very closely, him as the liaison, me as the director of photography, to try and make it as real as possible so that you get the sense that the audience can be sitting at home on their sofa, but the sense is they're there and experiencing what's going on. I'll give you an example of that. There was one episode where we were filming in Woolwich Arsenal, and the scenario is there's a car accident, the car turns over, the petrol spills into an underground nightclub, the nightclub goes up in flames, and then the whole hotel catches fire. Now, We obviously had the main cast members. Once they were in full breathing apparatus, you could never tell who was who. We had the stunt people that would often go in if the situation was a little bit more dangerous and double for the main actors. And then we had the real firefighters who would often go in to put the fire out properly. Now, the cast members loved them. They were great at acting, but they weren't necessarily brilliant at putting the fires out. The stunt people, I'm sorry, I love them as I do. They're often just, they want to make everything look really amazing, but it's not real. And so the best people were the real firefighters. Now, uh, on that first film that we did with Roger, when everything got out of control, and Roger would be the one that would call, right, everybody out, we'll put the fire out now. Uh, I said to Roger, look, the best bit is that last 10 or 20 seconds when your guys go in and the fire is really out of control. And I'm not stupid. I don't want to die in there. I said, but leave me in there. You stand with me and keep me in there until the last possible minute. And Roger was about 6'6" or something like that, huge guy. And he would literally be behind me with his arm on my shirt collar like this. And he would go, right, out now. And I would be tugged out. But those 10 or 15 or 20 seconds were the difference between, a small television fire and something that was, surrounding you really. So we pushed and pushed and pushed. And I think Roger was integral really for us taking the show to another level. I'll give you one other example. Same episode. And we were running two units. And I was at the main unit at the front, and we had a second unit running at the back. And the second unit, it was a camera operator that hadn't done much work on the show. And the situation was it was a long corridor, and he was supposed to follow two or three other firefighters, and the whole, corridor is on fire as they push forward to put the fire out. Now, one of the fire officers that was attached to us came round, and I said, how's it going on second unit? He went, yeah, it's not great. He said, your camera operator, he's frightened to go through the fire. It's like he keeps backing off. And I said, look, I can't ask him to do something. I'll come over and I'll do it shortly. So I finished what I was doing, and I went back and we reshot the scene in the corridor. And I followed them through, and I was completely used to, the situation, the heat and everything else. And we all wore fireproof outfits. We had fireproof balaclavas like Formula One people and everybody. And when we'd done the shot, I said to the same firefighter, I said, how was that? How did that look? He went, oh, that was great. He said, we were about 2 or 3 seconds away from a flashover. I said, what's that? He said, when all the oxygen in the room explodes in one go. And he said, you get a massive fireball. And I said, thank God it was 2 or 3 seconds away when we put it out. But it was that push to try and get everything as real as possible. And like I said, we had no CGI in those days. Everything was done for real. But it was a team of people that worked together. You trusted each other, and you learned sometimes by your mistakes. Fortunately, I don't think anybody ever got seriously injured. Everything was done in the proper way with the special effects people, the stunt people, the health and safety people. But it was always a question of pushing it to the limit to try and make it as exciting as possible. Yeah, as a DP working on London's Burning, I mean, I was very privileged to be working on one of the biggest and most successful shows on British television at the time. And London Weekend, they had money. So it was a well budgeted and financed show. Colin Monk, who was the production designer for many, many of the series, just did an incredible job. And we constructed huge sets just for we would film over 2 to 3 weeks for one episode. And then that set would be either destroyed or taken down. And the next week it would be a different one. And I remember we did one huge construction when we were at Long Lane in Southwark in the studio. And we built, or Colin built, an entire sewer system. Now, if you were standing in the sewer, it was probably about 8 feet tall. So it's quite a big sewer system. And Colin built this entire network, which was then filled with water. And the story was this construction work had fallen in, was trapped, and the rescue situation was that the fire brigade had to come and rescue him. So over the course of the hour of television, the water started, let's say, at knee height. But as we increased and increased, it got up to here. So all of us were in, wetsuits and everything. The actors were in there for real. We had to heat the water, obviously, because you couldn't keep people in there in freezing cold. And I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of gallons of water. Probably shouldn't tell you this story. Uh, Hundreds of thousands of gallons of water. But when we finished, obviously the set is entirely full of water. So Ray Holt, the prop master, was responsible for taking it down, but obviously getting rid of the water. So he put the main exit hoses into the main sewer system behind Southwark High Street. A couple of hours later, the fire brigade and the police came round and they said to Ray, "So Ray, have you had any problems with flooding or anything like that?" And then Ray suddenly went, "No, everything's fine here." And obviously, what he'd done was he overloaded the entire sewer system in Southwark High Street. And they said, Pronto Print have lost all of their stock down in their basement. He said, "We don't know where the water's coming from." And Ray said, "Nothing to do with us, nothing to do with us." So, it was great fun. And as I say, a lot of the time we were doing things for the first time. So it was very much learning by experience. And I remember one time Roger saying, I said, "What's the next episode, Roger?" Because he would get the scripts and he would work with the writers. He said, "Oh, it's all about a chip pan fire." I went, "Oh, great, that's going to be a big show." He said, "Have you ever seen a chip pan fire when somebody throws water on it?" And I don't know if you have, but basically the whole place explodes. So, I learnt a huge amount of respect for fire. We had another situation where we were in a porter cabin and we had two stuntmen that were going in with full breathing apparatus. And the idea is they go in, the fire's out of control, and they have to go out through a skylight. So Tom Lucy, who was the main stunt officer at the time, was in the lead. Tom went through, and as he cracked the skylight open, the oxygen feed that came from that turned the fire from, let's say, 3 or 4 feet high to the whole room. The other stuntman turned around and ran away. Tom climbed out of the hole. Ken Lowe was in front of me, lost all his eyebrows, and he looked like a Christmas pudding because he had a firefighter's helmet on. And when we turned the gas off, his fire helmet was still on fire. Tom, the stuntman, was outside. His fire outfit was now bright orange, which basically means all of the heat proofing is gone. His breathing apparatus just melted on his back. The heat was so intense. Tom was fine, and we all had a laugh about it and everything, but it taught me a huge amount of respect for both smoke and fire and how fast things can get out of control.